Certainly for those of you that don't recognize individuals, we have Mike Sena, who is the president for the Nationwide Fusion Center Association. He also leads the NICRIC in California. We have Russ Porter, who was with ODNI and is an intelligence specialist, was all key partners on the Nationwide Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative, and many, many more. And we have Rick Fuentes, who was former colonel for the New Jersey State Police, and who has led many different panels and committees for ICP in this space. There's lots of different intersections with these individuals in all the areas that we speak of, whether it has to do with Homeland stuff, whether it has to do with policy issues, whether it has to do with the challenges, and whether it has to do with the roadmap for the future. The intention and the sort of the process that we plan to use for this panel is I'm going to ask Mike, after they do their intros, to chat with us about the ideal world. What would the great graphic look like? Who would the participating entities be? Where might some of those outcomes be effective? Russ will then speak to, not speaking yet, Mike, sorry. Russ will then speak to, once Mike starts speaking, there is no word in edgewise. Russ will speak to the policy issues, the challenge issues, the intel issues, the landscape issues. Again, what we have been through and where there are great models for success and reimplementation. We are all of the mind, and we've made reference to it in different panels here, we're not looking to create something from anew when we have proven success stories. We understand we need to refresh. We understand we need to be concerned with policy issues that may be new and driving factors, but we also know that we shouldn't be throwing everything out at the same time. And then Rick will speak to what are programs, specifically in New Jersey, that show those successes in place today and the real data and numbers that impact it. So I think that tells a nice story, and again, they'll be open for questions as we go through the process. So Mike, if you could do just a self-intro and run for it.
Certainly. And for those that may, seeing all three of us on the stage, it may be more familiar right now because we have been portrayed as the three amigos on film. I was Steve Martin Short, Chevy Chase right there. So if you haven't seen the movie, go check it out. But my background, I am the director for the Northern California High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area, the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center, and my side job is the chair of the Criminal Intelligence Coordinating Council that is under the Bureau of Justice Assistance and the Global Advisory Committee. And I also am the co-chair for the HIDA Information Technology Committee, among many other jobs.
Which is why I didn't do his bio. I just figured he would have to remember all that.
But, my role has mainly been for the last, 30 years working on issues from violent crime, counterterrorism, information technology coordination, collaboration, and trying to figure out how to connect our country to share information more effectively.
Russ Porter's my name. Intel's my game. I started out as a police officer on the street. They found out very quickly I couldn't shoot straight. As Colonel Fuentes would say, if Russ has got a gun, the safest place to stand is directly in front of him. I couldn't solve crimes, and so they put me in Intel. And I've been in intelligence for 90% of my career. Had the pleasure of working with many, not only these panelists, but others, Maria and others, or after 9/11 especially, on national level issues. I was asked to join the Director of National Intelligence in 2010, and I just retired from that position in December, but I'm still out helping leaders and organizations develop and improve their use of intelligence. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. And like Maria said, I was in the state police 40 years. The last 15 as superintendent. That translated to 4 governors and 9 attorneys general and 1,000 martinis. It is New Jersey. Right now, I'm the Deputy Director of the Center on Policing and Community Resilience at Rutgers University. And for those of you who have long memories like I do, that was originally George Kelling's outfit, the Police Institute, which evolved into Tom O'Reilly's outfit, the Center on Policing. So those are mighty big shoes to fill. I'll never fill those, but we're trying to bring those legacy initiatives from those 2 great leaders who had a tremendous impact upon the professional law enforcement back in the center. I'm also the chair of the ICP Homeland Security Committee, and I'm delighted to be here this afternoon. Always a pleasure to be with my co-panelists.
Thank you.
And, going back to, Maria's conversation about this perfect state, back when I started in the 90s and they started in the 1890s, yeah, only a few people thought that was funny. But when we started to work, in my time in the 90s, we had a surge of violent crime driven by cocaine, especially crack cocaine and methamphetamine. And we kind of coalesced around, hey, we've got to stop these criminals one way or another. And, in the 80s, we had, the HIDTA program started out trying to push towards this concept that we've got to, focus these resources. And before that, risk. We've got to deconflict. But we had a lot of people and a lot of programs that started to focus on violent crime. And then here we went to 9/11, and then everything was focused on this huge issue of counterterrorism. We've got to stop the counterterrorism threat. And there was a tremendous amount of work done by these two gentlemen here and others right after September 11th to say, we've got a structure, we've got resources, we need to coalesce this into this concept of building fusion centers around the country. Areas where we can, bring information together and share it in real time and focus on the threats. And over the years, we've had ups and downs with that whole concept. We've had lots of naysayers that say, hey, can't the 18,000 law enforcement agencies in America do this anyways? And as we know, they can't. None of us can do it alone. And part of it is, and the biggest problems that I've seen over time, it's not always the technology, it's not always the policy, but it's oftentimes the people and bringing people together. Because the core element of this is the personality-driven areas that we're working on. And in the perfect state world, the things that we have, like the National Data Exchange Index and the Law Enforcement Enterprise Portal and the 60-plus resources that are in there, the Homeland Security Information Network with the plethora of resources and tools they have in there, the El Paso Intelligence Center and their resources, all these things should be interconnected, intertwined and interwoven. The very fact that right now I can't reach every law enforcement executive in America and share information in real time is absurd. But that's because we have 18,000 agencies and constant turnover and change. The other part of that is the Nationwide Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative, the NSI. That was initially the foundation of looking at, and the recommendations from the 9/11 commission's report, was that we need to build out a capacity to identify threats before they hit us. And so they looked at all these behaviors. In a perfect world, we would have everyone educated on those behaviors in the country and how to report that information. We did work on a unified message that was done in 2011 that said, this is how you report it. Make sure you get the information to your local law enforcement, and local law enforcement, make sure you get that to your fusion center and your Joint Terrorism Task Force at the FBI. And over the last few years with COVID, we have lost an incredible amount of knowledge within the law enforcement community of folks that have retired and folks that have never been trained on what suspicious activity reporting is, how to report it, and why it is important. And those numbers have dropped around the country, including the number of cases that are currently being investigated by the Joint Terrorism Task Force. I'm not saying that international terrorism or domestic terrorism disappeared. Some of the things that we're seeing right now are more related to swatting incidents and threats online. That is inundating folks like our friends at CGIS at the National Threat Operations Center with 1.3 to 1.5 million tips and leads that are coming in a year. But the future needs to have not just that network that we need to build out, where every chief and every executive knows what's going on, and every officer and everyone in between knows what's available as far as resources, where information should go, because I think this is possible, but it takes a sustained effort. But we also need technology. And everyone is giving AI the rap that it is, because these guys wrote their notes on, what was that, GP Chat? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they've got their notes on that. But we do need to use enhanced analytical capabilities just to go through all of these tips and leads that come through, that are coming through, and also to figure a way where we have gaps in information sharing. Because I think that's the other thing that is often missed, is that we don't recognize where their information is not being shared at all. So I think in a perfect world, we would see a map that shows the flow of information across the country. We'd be able to see the threats in real time and manage them with the help of artificial intelligence. And we'd be able to get the resources at the right place in the right time to prevent the next attack next mass casualty incident, and next surge of overdoses from fentanyl that we're seeing, because those are the threats that we're seeing today, and the threats of tomorrow will be even worse. So we've got to be prepared. So I'm going to pass it on to the brains of the operation, Russ Porter.
Is the slide advancer there?
The slide advancer is right here.
Up there.
You can use that, and if you'd like to use the podium, I will clear the space, whatever your preference is,
If
Russ.
I get behind the podium, they won't be able to see me.
Okay.
So, thanks, Mike. Great context. And I think, as kind of the appointed historian of a lot of our efforts, I wanted to spend some time just talking about the evolution of an information sharing environment. And some of you may be familiar after 9/11 with the creation of the program manager for the information sharing environment, which was really constrained to terrorism-related information. But there's been an information sharing environment in the context of the biggest threats to our communities and to our homeland, and I would argue now a convergence of national security issues and homeland security issues and hometown security issues. And so that's what I want to do with some of these slides and just kind of walk you down memory lane here. I used to not care much for history because I thought you never learn anything new. Ha ha ha, get it? History. But it always falls flat.
Not one laugh.
I should
We'll
learn.
work on that one.
But everything we do today, our history is with us today. And it also helps us understand better what we might do for the future. So if you go back into the 1960s, organized crime was really the national threat, the focus, the investment. That's where we saw things created like the organized crime strike forces in U.S. attorneys' offices and the creation of the Association of Law Enforcement Intelligence Units and the creation of the International Association of Law Enforcement Intelligence Analysts, and even the RISC projects, which were created at the time as multi-state regional intelligence projects. That's what they were called at that time. Because the focus was on this particular threat. Well, we still have that threat, and we still have those entities today. And we saw in the 1980s, give or take, the emergence of really a focus on the drug threat, the global war on drugs. And we saw the creation of the high-intensity drug trafficking areas under the newly created Office of National Drug Control Policy in Washington, and many states created state drug czars as well. We saw the creation in the early 70s, but the kind of the flourishing of the El Paso Intelligence Center down in El Paso, Texas, here in this state, the National Drug Intelligence Center, all the information sharing systems that they established. And then, almost on a dime, our information sharing focus moved to, as Mike said, terrorism. And we saw the creation of DHS and the information sharing platforms that they have, the Homeland Security Information Network, for example. We saw, as we've talked a little bit about here, the creation of the Criminal Intelligence Coordinating Council, and Maria mentioned it in her opening remarks today, and even IGES emerged during this time. And just a little bit about the CICC, and all three of us had served on the CICC. Mike is the current chair. It's part of the Global Justice Information Sharing Network. The CICC, in May of 2004, for the first time ever, brought together most of these groups and entities that I've talked about. The Association of Law Enforcement Intelligence Units, LEIU, IALEA, HIDA programs, the RISC program, brought them to the same table to say, look, we've got to get serious about this collaboration. We were unifying as a country. Everybody had their flags out on, remember seeing those pictures? Everybody had their flags, the U.S. flags out on their front porch flying. We were together and unified in an effort to try and improve the information sharing environment. We saw the creation of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and, as I mentioned, the Program Manager for the Information Sharing Environment to help improve our strategic approach to building these bridges and integrating these efforts. That I would argue, and I think many people would agree, we've seen an erosion or a dilution of some of those efforts or a loss of support in some of those areas. So The threat of obviously has evolved into targeted violence, mass casualty events, school safety issues, the full range of things we've talked about and heard about so far here today at the community forum. And finally, here's today's information sharing environment. You read about all this in the news. These are national security issues that are happening in our hometowns. These have some serious implications for information sharing for everybody in this room. If you think about it, there are nation-state actors who are, in a layered way, either directly committing acts against the homeland and the institutions and infrastructures and information systems within it, or they are directing proxies to do it. Sometimes the proxies know it, sometimes they don't. Or they're enabling those proxy actors to do it, criminal groups that have a safe haven in which to operate. Or, as one of the speakers said earlier today, they have greater capability today. I believe it was our CISA rep here from Texas. Mm-hmm. They have greater capability today maybe that outpaces our own ability to defend. In fact, Jen Easterly just commented about this earlier this week at an Aspen forum about get your expectations set. We're probably going to have some attacks that we can't stop. So you see all of these things. This is the information sharing environment threat today. It threatens the institutions and infrastructures and information sharing capabilities that you all are responsible for, eroding trust in our institutions, in our information and the integrity of that information. And so I would argue that we're in a new space in this evolution of nation-state threats, gray zone tactics, and if you don't unfamiliar with that, because I was unfamiliar with it, war here, we understand that. That's tanks and battleships and fighter planes. Peace over here. The homeland is under assault with gray zone tactics. It falls between war and peace, and it's that long list you just saw. So I think that's something to take into consideration as we think about a framework for an information sharing environment. Something that has both strategic information presented through analysis based on data and information that moves efficiently and quickly through a system, as you see toward the bottom, the broader information sharing capabilities are needed. And I hope this will spark some thinking for all of you as you spend the next day kind of pondering where are we at and where do we need to go.
Thank you, Russ. I appreciate that. Colonel, we're going to switch roles. You're going to give him the clicker, and I'm going to sit next to him.
By popular demand, I was asked to eject Maria from the podium.
I'm okay with that.
And Russ, I am standing up. So look, I'm very proud and honored to be part of the old farts of the ISE panel. But I'm going to talk about a relatively new initiative. When I say new, actually it's been around for 10 years, but it's come in pieces. It's been the struggle of the New Jersey State Police through the Fusion Center to reduce gun violence in the states. Some of this early formation of the components occurred when I was there, and now under Pat Callahan, who's doing an absolutely tremendous job with it. So the name of the program is NJCAP 5, and that acronym can be drawn out into the actual title, which is the Crime Analysis, Precision Policing, and Precision Prosecution Program. Now, this program is a whole of public safety. It's analytically and data-driven, and the whole aim of it, the whole goal of it, is to reduce shootings and homicides in the state of New Jersey. So the key partners in this are the Attorney General's Office, the state police, which actually hosts the platform, the data platforms, and also, of course, the Regional Operation Center, which is doing all of the analysis that's bringing some of the results that I'm going to talk to you about. So if we take a look and break this down into the 5 components here, there's 3 things that you're trying to accomplish by this program. Number 1 is to take the most serious gun offenders off the street, because as everybody knows, particularly if you're in the profession, the larger number of shootings is done by a much smaller population of serial shooters who are the trigger pullers. So those are the people you want to target. And to go to the staffing issue, like the assistant chief was talking about this morning, we don't have the resources to more broadly target everybody who's involved in a gun crime. It's better to invest our resources in a focused, laser-like way on those most serious offenders. The second goal is to shift the focus to the gun and not always on the offender, because guns get passed around the community. For instance, there's one gun which hasn't been recovered yet in the state of New Jersey that's been tracked to 15 homicides. So it's a community gun, so not every criminal has his or her own gun, and so we've shifted the focus to the gun. So if you look at an organized crime chart, remember, it used to be the capo di tutti capo and the soldados. Now there's a gun up on the top of that chart, and there's people that are linked to that gun and incidents that are linked to that gun underneath it. And that's really a paradigm shift in law enforcement in the way that they're looking at violent crime. And the third component is this: how do you keep this detective on the street investigating homicides and shootings? So he or she does not have to come back to the station and fat figure all of the inquiries and databases that they need to progress their investigation. You've got 2 to 3 hours before somebody's on a bus, a train, or a plane after committing an act like this, or fleeing to somebody that they know. But you got to go back. If you're a detective, you got to go back to the station, and you got to queue into all these databases. So there's a solution to that as well. The first component is the AG. The AG in New Jersey is a very powerful position. So we've used the enforcement and authority of the Attorney General over law enforcement in New Jersey, and particularly the county prosecutors, to issue directives that help the state police get the data that they need. For instance, this started all the way back in 2008 when the AG issued a directive that every gun had to be entered into E-Trace, and when the ATF came back to that department, that they had to share that data with the ROC, so the ROC could do trend and pattern analysis on those shootings. In 2013, because they weren't always entering those guns in a timely manner, the Attorney General issued a directive that said the gun has to be entered within 24 hours. So they're trying to speed up the amount of time it takes to get the data into the ROC so they can go ahead and target the most serial shooters. The second thing is the Crime Gun Center. You know, sometimes our bureaucracies are our own worst enemy. Do you know what it takes now to process a gun? So the gun comes into the lab, there's an intake, the gun sits in a pile there, and then it goes to CSI where there's an inspection of the gun for trace analysis. Then it's going to go to other units like photography, DNA, and then fingerprinting, right? All of those in the lab, the state police lab, are separate units. So what happens is the gun transits one unit, they work through the backlog, they get to that gun. Then they send it to the next unit. They work through that backlog and they get to the gun. And this continues on through the 4 or 5 processes, including the test firing and the entry into NIBIN. Instead of doing that, what the state police did, actually, for those of you who know former Lieutenant Colonel Ray Gadetti, he came up with the idea, why don't we just get rid of the bureaucracy? Instead of taking the gun and putting it in every unit, let's create a crime gun intelligence center. And let's bring the technicians from each one of those units down there every single day in a round robin to go around the room and to have all those processes done. It used to take 10 months to process a gun in New Jersey, and that's because we were processing guns for evidence and prosecution. We weren't processing guns for lead value information, which is what that detective needed in 24 to 48 hours. So as a result of the Crime Gun Intelligence Center, it now takes 24 hours, 36, 48 hours at most for that detective to get all of the information that can be extracted from that gun. 10 months to 1 to 2 days. Lastly, mentioned about the detectives staying on the street. So in between 2013 and 2015, the ROC established 3 subsidiaries, real-time crime centers, one in Newark, one in Trenton, and one in the corridor between Atlantic City and Camden in South Jersey. Every time there's a shooting, there's a homicide, any serious crime with a gun, they're going to go to work on suspects and victims and completely do all the checks for that detective, whether it's prison checks, because where's a person going to run to if they commit an act? They're going to run to the people that usually talk to them in prison or visited them in prison, so those visitors lists are important. ALPR checks, other MVC checks, All kinds of database inquiries are done very, very quickly, and in 2 hours, this detective has a product on suspects and victims. He can stay in the field, he can keep interviewing witnesses, and he can stay on the trail while it's still hot. So this is the precision policing aspect of it. But what happens with the precision prosecution? Actually, what happens when there's an arrest and the investigators have done their part, what happens here quite often? Person goes back out on the street because the judges are looking at, especially under bail reform, they're looking at a kind of they're looking at risk of flight, and they're looking at a public safety assessment, whether that person is a risk to the community or is not a risk to the community. They may look at convictions, but they may not realize that the person who pulled a gun on somebody had their proceeding downgraded to a disorderly or a more simpler offense that would not influence the judge's opinion when deciding what bail reform is going to be. So we had to find a way to empower the prosecutors. That's the other 180-degree portion of this. No matter how good these detectives are, if the prosecutors can't adequately inform the judges in the first 24 to 48 hours, which is the most you can detain a person usually before an initial hearing or a bail hearing, that person's going to end up out on the street, and they're going to be creating more crimes. They're going to pull the trigger again. They're going to go after the people that turned them in. That's why part of the process, when the detectives or when the RTCs send information out, it's also on things like rival gangs, the victim's family, because you get retaliatory shootings. So the way they accomplish this is the ROC analysts look at 250 on average reports of everybody who's arrested in the state of New Jersey on an average day. Maybe about 5 to 6% of those reports involve gun crimes. That's what they cull out of the herd. They do a deep dive on the 5 to 6%. They draw out those who are at risk of recidivism with all the information they can develop. Every single day they talk to state prosecutors who are assigned to a team in North Jersey, Central Jersey, and South Jersey. Now the prosecutors are informed to go to the judges. So the difference is, it isn't just a defendant standing there anymore. It's the prosecutor standing next to the defendant telling the judge what the real story is. So this is what happened. The precision prosecution element of this was implemented in 2021. In 2021, there was a 10% increase in shootings over 2020. In 2022, after the implementation of this program, there was approximately 25% decrease in shooting victims, shooting incidents, 26% decrease in shooting hits, those are aggravated assaults with a gun, and a 14% decrease in shooting murders. So the program works, and we're talking about a statewide program here. It's not just Newark, it's not Jersey City, it's not Atlantic City, it's not Camden, it's all 15 major cities participating in this, but more than that, all of the other approximately 460 full-time police departments in the state of New Jersey. So that's sort of a programmatic view of some of the things that we've been talking about. Thank you.
Okay, so let me ask you gentlemen a couple of questions. Not only have we reviewed what is the history of success, not only did Mike create that picture of what gaps we need to address and what challenges we need to face, and not only did Rick then speak to how those same concepts of collaboration, of policy, of data sharing, of collection of data, of analysis of data can make direct and significant impacts at the operational level. I know that we all want to move forward on maybe a NSI 2.0, whether that's with tips and leads. What is being done that we can share with the audience, and what visibility and support can we provide?
No, absolutely. And on what is being done, so recently, and this is as of last week, we finalized the formation of some task teams that were really the result of a summit that we had last year, an Intel Summit, where we brought together about 140 partners representing all major law enforcement organizations in the country. And the goal of the task team was we had come to the realization after some major tragedies, the information was not being shared the way it was intended or meant to be, and also technological issues as well. So the summit came up with 6 recommendations. One was for governance. We need to have an organization to make sure that we don't get off track and that we're following through on what we're supposed to do. And the resounding results of from all of the participants was that the Criminal Intelligence Coordinating Council needs to be that entity, but also needs to be empowered and have the resources to get the job done. The other one was steady state and crisis state communications and engagement strategy, to make sure that we have an understanding and a flow of how information should go during normal times and during those worst days that we have in our history as a nation. Also, resource and sustainment of the information sharing environment. Russ had mentioned about the PMIC, and many of you that have been around for a while remember Shaminder Paul. He is like the last PMIC that we had, and that position has been taken out of the Director of National Intelligence, out of that office, and taken to the White House. So, and not filled. And I've had at least 3 calls with the Government Accountability Office asking if I know where the PMIC is. And I tell them, well, if you can figure it out, I'll get a wanted poster because we need to find that person. It doesn't exist. So we don't have a person responsible for information sharing in the nation. And as was said earlier by Russ, it was focused on terrorism, but what that office was able to do was beyond the scope of terrorism based on that framework. The other component of this is policies and standard operating procedures. We've got to have consistency. And the CICC itself has created over 130 different documents over the years on policy procedures. Many of them need to be updated, so that's part of what we need to do. And the other one is training and technical assistance. And training is a big one. Back about, must have been 10 years ago, we did a big push on the Nationwide Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative and trained about 427,000 law enforcement personnel in the country. We had 800,000. Almost half the people were trained. Well, that has probably gone by now, and people have not been trained. So we have a huge gap now because of that. So we need to get training out to those folks. And the big kind of thing that brings all this together is technology. We've got to have good technology. So one of the things that we're going to be bringing back at the Bureau of Justice Assistance and Global and CICC is a standards council to talk about standards and technology. Because too many times we have silos of excellence where people have procured technology that they can't share anything and they can't share with people. Or they'll say, all right, we want to connect this to Leap, we want to connect this to Index, and they'll go, oh, well, my vendor's locked in. I can't share information. So the NSI piece, we have a NSI Executive Steering Committee and a task team right now working on updating the Nationwide Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative. We actually have a meeting next month, first in-person meeting of that steering group. And then we've got to figure out with the HISN, State and Local Intelligence Community, the Index APB and the CJIS Leap APB and the others that are out there, how to bring them together. But I'll pass it on to my partners who are also working on many components of this.
Can I just jump in with one or two thoughts here about this? So when that CICC was formed, that was really a grassroots effort by local and state law enforcement folks. And it wasn't constrained by, it was to build an intelligence capability, which requires good information and data, but an analytic process that transforms that into something that executives can use to give strategic guidance, to get a better understanding, so that they're not just awash in a sea of data. It was not constrained to a particular crime. And that was part of my point with raising up the kind of the history. Organized crime hasn't gone away. We know that narcotics use has not gone away. We know that terrorism has evolved, has not gone away, certainly hasn't gone away. And now we're facing nation-state actors who are fanning the flames inside the homeland. And so I would just add to this that, whether it's NSI or whether it's the great programs that are at FBI, Index, and others, the scope of these things must be geared to adapt to the threat or be able to encompass what this threat is morphing and changing into, rather than waiting for Congress to have to act and create something new. So I think it really requires us to put our foot on the gas on this thing and help push us along a little faster with increased collaboration, which gets harder because there's a lot of divisiveness in the country, and that's, again, being fomented by from a lot of different places. So those are just some of the initial thoughts I have, Maria, as Mike talks about this, and with the colonel's great examples, and they do some great stuff in New Jersey.
I'll throw in another question or two, but I will respond to a couple of these issues. Mike, you made reference to the recommendations that then broke into working groups, et cetera. I just, as part of the global group, the CICC group, as well as then some of these task teams. So that, as I mentioned, the priorities that we are addressing, this is fundamental to the data sharing. Again, Homeland, hometown, all and about data sharing. We are centric to that. So that's something that we want to recruit you to be in support of and aware of, whether we formulate what might be just a group that keeps you in the know, or whether we say, okay, we need some information and support in these skill sets. Would you want to participate in these groups? That is definitely something that we want to address. From the increased collaboration, Russ, not only are these sessions and opportunities ripe for those pickings, but obviously the connection between CGIS and everything that's happening short and long term, and this, frankly, in my mind, just as the betting perspective again, have a greater chance of success and resonating for the local law enforcement, for the federal law enforcement communities, if there is joining in forces. And again, part of that is not to replicate different things. Part of that is to use each other's assets. Part of that is to be able to use each other's audiences, cross-pollinate, et cetera. So I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it's really something that then again, I would say from a community perspective, that's something that we would want to facilitate, to engage, and to help wherever we can.
And I'm sorry, I had to jump in with just one more
Yes,
to react
please.
to you, Maria. So again, when we started this whole thing with the CICC, the four words for it was to be central, powerful, permanent, and maybe the most important word, inclusive. It was to be inclusive, and really was. And as we worked through in the early times of this, I mean, again, FBI is part of it. DHS is part of it. People were trying to coordinate this, and this is the name of the group, Criminal Intelligence Coordinating Council,
Right.
to help drive us forward.
Absolutely.
So, yet tremendous opportunity here for IGIS in collaboration in all of this this effort.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I
I'll
was going to
just.
say, oops, go ahead.
No. Okay. So that never happens. Mike never gives me.
I want to jump in again.
This is a special moment, Mike. I feel so close to you right now. So, in August of 2022, during the Intelligence Summit, what I found unique was people went into different rooms and discussed different aspects of this. And almost universally, everybody came back in whatever they said had impact upon the CICC's role. Now, Mike's been on, and he's now the chair, he's been on CICC a long time. Past chair and Russ, I was on it for a whole bunch of years. They were producing most of the ISC products in the beginning. I had so many of those products sitting next to my desk, I eventually put a flower pot on it. It actually became part of the office furniture. It was literally this high. And most of those products need that 2.0 right now. But quite frankly, and I guess I can say it out loud because I don't have to kiss anybody's backside anymore, is that there's a certain malaise towards the CICC. And that's very dangerous because this is the main FACA, as they call it, under the DAG's office, I guess, Deputy Attorney General. The program office is BJA. But we can't let this slide because this is the voice. If you look at the cross-section of all the members in CICC, including the private sector, they represent literally every component of interest to the public safety sector in this country. And if we lose that ability, which we emphasize over and over and over again in the Intelligence Summit in 2022, if we lose that ability, that's a sad state of affairs. And we turn the inmates, they run the asylum.
Yeah, I was going to say, Carlton Moore, who's now the director of the Bureau of Justice Assistance, a really great guy from Ohio, has taken this on personally as one of those things that he wants to champion because we have seen basically things have slid so much over the last three years or so that we have folks out there that have no clue of if they see something where the hell they should report it. It's great to see signs up there that see something, say something, and the 5 numbers that are on there that who knows where the hell they go. But we've got to be consolidated, and that information has to be triaged in a way that we stop threats. And when it's done right, we're stopping mass casualty events. We're stopping tons. Well, I shouldn't say tons, but pound and pound and pound of fentanyl or other harmful substances. It's getting people to understand that there is a mechanism to stop threats in America. And when we look across the board of the threats we're seeing and the need, as mentioned earlier, with mental health issues, but that whole concept of threat assessment and threat management is critical. We have to be able to identify those folks that will do that next mass casualty event. We have to identify those folks that are moving those large quantities of drugs across America, or guns, or whatever deadly commodity it is. And we aren't doing that as effectively as we used to. Many times it's because law enforcement agencies have lost a lot of resources on patrol, and therefore specialized units that used to do some of these investigations don't exist anymore. And we have seen that happen over and over again. But if we are only being reactive in public safety, homeland security, and law enforcement, that threat will overwhelm us. And I'll tell you right now, with 107,000 plus deaths from fentanyl, that we are well past being overwhelmed by the threats that are out there, or the mass casualty shootings that you see on the TV every day that many times could have been prevented.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the panelists? And this is at the heart and soul of the data sharing efforts. And frankly, it is holistic, it's successful, it's a model. It marries and mirrors much of what CGIS as a community at the federal level and wanting to bring in the local law enforcement level wants to do and seeks to reach the same goal. So to me, it's a no-brainer. Question in the back?
Have you talked to the international community and see what they're doing in regards to information sharing from other nations?
And we have had communication with some of our foreign partners, and more interestingly than not, they are coming to us to see what we've done about information sharing. So, but I oftentimes have at least every month a few folks that I'm meeting with that are coming from other countries to talk about the issues, and they're dealing with some of the same threats. One of the more interesting ones that I had in this last year came from an area of the world that the chemicals are coming from that produce the fentanyl that we're seeing that are coming across our southwest border. And he said, hey, previous to this year, we really didn't care. It was not an issue. People were not dying in our community from fentanyl overdoses. And then he said, but they are now. And we're very concerned about it. But when we talk about some of our international partners and the way that they share information, many of them have been looking at the fusion center models and trying to talk about implementing that. And we have also sent some of our folks who have worked on that model here to other countries to work with them. And then we also have some of our Five Eye partners that actually have personnel deployed here within the United States that we've been working with to enhance information. But also, Interpol and the LEGATs from the FBI have been a good partner with us when we talk about threat to life, because those are threats that are coming through social media companies. The individual may be anywhere in the world. So when those threats come through and a local fusion center finds or a local officer or the NTOC is encountering that, those threats have to get to those foreign nations. And we've seen a lot more collaboration through this process and working with social media companies, the 20 plus that are partnering up to share information with the NTOC, than I think I've ever seen before, because all threats are global. All the threats that we have in the world are global. So I don't know if you guys have comments on that.
Yeah, the Center on Policing at Rutgers has done a lot of work in Europe. And one of the most prominent examples of a lack of information sharing has been in Germany, so far as I've seen. The states within Germany don't share information with each other. And it's largely parochial across national boundaries there. We did a project in Sweden with the Swedish police, which lasted about 2 years. They had similar problems with processing guns and not. And they totally understood and admitted to the fact that they don't share, they don't go, even like they worry about Europol, they worry about Interpol. And so a lot of this information is still locked in country. Back in December of 2019, we attended and helped host with the Swedish police a conference in Umeå, Sweden, which incidentally, 100 miles north of the Arctic Circle in the beginning of December is not the best place to go. But many of the major cities in Europe, including Germany, Berlin, sent representatives to that meeting, and the room was filled. And there was a recognition that there needed to be an ISC across Europol, in the EU, across those boundaries. And we're not talking about terrorism. You can almost get the, they don't want to share sort of that level of information. We're talking about crimes. We're talking about gang crimes. We're talking about gun trafficking. We're talking about human trafficking, which incidentally the countries in Northern Europe are being inundated with right now. Okay, these countries never experienced these problems. Germany, the Nordic countries like Sweden, who have, suddenly find that they have 250 former Al-Qaeda, or that's not Al-Qaeda, ISIS fighters, excuse me, ISIS fighters that are living about 20 miles south of Gothenburg with virtually no community policing going on. So, I mean, and this all happened in 2 years, so it is that overwhelming environment that I actually think the ISC in this country is years ahead of what I've seen in Europe. But it is a global issue, and it's going to be an issue for us too if we don't fix this BDQ.
Well, even the reference to the global issue, it's interesting because one of the breakouts we're going to have has an individual speaking to policy issues. He happened to travel to those two locations, those two nations, or those two countries of Germany and Switzerland, and he's bringing back good news stories and great programs as it relates to correctional facilities. Now, he doesn't presume or speak to the data sharing. We could certainly ask those questions. But it's ironic that everybody's got their weak points, and if we could just, collaborate even at that level, there could be improvements for that global defense.
Criminal, not security issue.
Understood?
Just start with criminal.
Just learn from each other, though.
Totally with you. That's where you start.
Alrighty then. I thank you all very much. I've worked with these gentlemen over the years, and I can't say enough about their skills, their talent, and most importantly, their commitment. So know that having them here is an honor and a privilege. Know that having them as resources, ongoing resources, is a no-brainer. I'm sort of going to press the guilt button with them, as with CGIS. These are extraordinary partners to have that are really engaged and committed to our mission space. So I thank them all.